Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the program Times Exclusive here on Times Network. My name is Banda. Thank you for joining us. The program tonight is coming to you courtesy of Rainbow Pens. My guest in this edition of the program is well-known economist Henry Kachaje. As you are aware, Finance Minister presented the 2019-2020 budget. In this edition, we'll look at critically at the budget and what it means to a local Malawian.
I love brilliant green on my walls. I love signal red, sweet lime, electric blue. I just love golden yellow.
You get all that and more at Rainbow Paints. Imagine a water-based paint that is water-resistant. Imagine a paint that is absolutely washable to remove dirt. And it guarantees you 10,000 cleaning scrubs over its lifespan without losing its luster. There can only be one paint that does just that, and that paint is Acrylic Sheen. Get yours today at all leading hardware stores. Rainbow Paints. Peace of mind. Part of the deal.
Ndine Banda. Ndi programu inanso sabata ino ya Times Exclusive. Tawaita na bambo Henry Kachaje, mmodzi mwa amalawi amene amazitsata za chuma. Kutati fotokozere kuti kodi budget imene nduna yathu ya za chuma a Mwanamvekha adapereka ku parliament ikutanthauza chiyani kwa munthu wamba. Ndine okondwa kuti tili limodzi nthawi ino. Bambo Henry Kachaje, welcome.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Madzulo ano.
Thank you.
We are meeting after days the Minister of Finance presented the national budget.
Yes, that's right.
My question is it a proper budget?
Thank you very much, Brian. To answer your question, no. I like the terminology that the minister has used. He's not necessarily focused on it to become or to be seen as pro-poor per se, but he's saying the theme around the budget is inclusive growth, economic empowerment, and the future we want. The words that he has used are quite important. The first part is inclusive growth, so which means obviously it has not discarded the poor. He has also used the words economic empowerment. Again, those are the terms that you want to use when you want to progress, which involves everyone. And then he's talking about the future that we want. So it's a budget that is focused on growth, and it's a budget that is focused on inclusive economic empowerment. So far, at least, that's the theme that he's saying. Is it pro-poor? Well, personally, I would appreciate that as a country, maybe we should slowly or maybe quickly start moving away from the word pro-poor, because you need wealth creation in a nation. You need economic growth that is uplifting the poor out of poverty. So it's a good budget from that term.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good budget.
It's a budget. It's a good budget. It has got some mixed things in it, as it is, but by and large, I think it is covering critical areas and sectors that might indeed reflect some growth if properly implemented.
We are talking of over 40 billion going into subsidy.
Yes.
Is that the route that we need to take as a country? Because others have said the countries that have done well financially, these are or economically, these are the countries that have been doing a lot of income generation, empowering their people so that they can create more wealth.
That's right.
Is this the right way to go as a country?
Well, the question of subsidy is a tricky one because even developed nations, you're talking about countries like the US, you are talking about Japan or China. These are countries where they still have subsidies for their farmers, and you're talking about commercial farmers for that matter. You go to the US, a commercial farmer who has all tractors, who has access to all the latest equipment that we can think about, has access to government financing. So arguing from that point, it might be tricky for a country which is economically disadvantaged like Malawi to think that we can assist our farmers without some support to them. But for me, the question should be, what kind of support should be given to the farmers? We, for some time, have been giving this farm input subsidy, which the target has been mostly the farmers that are at the lower end of the bracket. Gladly, over the years, I think government has been graduating some of the farmers because the number of beneficiaries has continued to decline. At some point, I know we were supporting over 1.5 million farmers, but this particular program, or this particular budget rather, is only supporting 900,000 farmers, which must probably give us some comfort that we are graduating some of the farmers out of subsistent kind of support that has characterized FISIP. But I trust that if we could take part of that money and support the farmers a little much better, and I would explain that probably when we are looking at some of the allocations, like to the on the Green Belt Initiative or irrigation farming, for example. For me, I think this is an area where if government invested heavily, it could actually support more farmers than giving a few farmers some coupons to just buy probably a bag of fertilizer and to buy some seed.
If you were the finance minister, would you carry on with this project, the subsidy project?
The subsidy project, or okay, maybe let's look at it from different angles before I come directly to answer you yes or no. It's a program that is meeting certain specific needs in the society, but these are social services. I would probably think more about the cash transfer program as being adequate to cover certain needs of a certain grouping in our in our community or in the farming community. But I would probably focus more on the medium scale sized kind of farmers, those that you can put in farmer clubs and in groups, and put it as a revolving loan program where you give them some inputs, but with an understanding and an expectation that they need to pay back. But those that can't afford, the ultra poor, should be catered through the subsidy, the cash transfer program. So I would say it's a program that must have a gradual phase out, but it can't be something that we can continue forever.
We have moved from 1.5 trillion. We are now on 1.7 trillion.
That's right.
Where are we going to get this money?
Well, the minister has actually outlined where he believes the money is going to come from. If I'm not mistaken, I can check my notes, but I think he's hoping that we can actually get almost 1.4 trillion of that money, or 1.4, 1.3 trillion of that money from revenues that can come both from within and what we are going to get from some donor support. There is a short deficit in the budget, which is below 300 billion. But it is actually encouraging that almost 1 trillion of that money has been budgeted from locally raised resources, from taxes, from other revenues that government gets. So it is possible to finance our national budgets largely from our own local resources, but there is also need to have specific investments in sectors that can actually spur economic growth, so that government has got more access to revenue through taxes and other non-direct tax revenue forms.
He says, the minister, that the economy is going to grow with 5%. With all the challenges the country is facing today.
Right.
Are you optimistic?
I would say if you look at the economic growth that we registered in the past 2-3 years, which of course has been reasonably good. I think we reached close to 6%, if I'm not mistaken, in the year before last, which actually gives us an indication we can achieve such growth of 6%. It's actually a modest projection, I would say, because if you look at the Malawi Growth and Development Strategy, the projections that we've been aiming at is at least to hit 7% economic growth. Now, you said in the midst of the economic challenges that we are facing, I would say probably if you look at the macroeconomic indicators, we have sailed through some of the worst patches that we had in the past 4 years, because inflation is down to single digits, so that's a positive. You are talking about the exchange rate between the dollar and the kwacha and other major trading currencies. It has remained, the exchange rate has remained relatively stable for some time. You look at interest rates, the base lending rate has dropped significantly, or at least reasonably good, I think to somewhere about now 13.5 or thereabout percent. So if you look at the macroeconomic fundamentals or the factors, probably a projection of economic growth of 6% is realistic. But that is going to be based on how prudent we are going to be as a government, as a country, in terms of managing expenditure to remain within the approved budget lines.
What about the allocations? Which ones are making sense? Which ones are not making sense?
The allocations, I was actually looking at some of the allocations in the budget. Obviously, education has gotten the lion's share.
Not agriculture.
No, agriculture is coming second.
Okay.
So education has 172.8 billion Malawi kwacha. And they've talked about construction of some new primary schools, rehabilitation of some of the schools, and even I think the tertiary education has got some good allocations. Agriculture has come second with 167 billion Malawi kwacha. And then you come to health. Health has 101 billion. If you look at these top three, these are quite key in any economy, in any country, because these are the key social services that a country, a government must provide for its people. Education, agriculture, health. Agriculture is because we are an agri-based economy. So investment in that sector is definitely justified. Health, obviously, we need better health services improved in the country. But when you begin to look at the nitty-gritty details in the budget, people say the devil is in the detail. Yeah. So when you begin to look at some of the details, then you look and say, okay, probably, yes, agriculture has 167 billion. But where is that 167 billion going? And then I looked, and I discovered that, okay, FISIP, the one you're talking about, is taking about 35.5 billion. And then there is maize procurement, which is taking another 10 billion. And then I looked at what has gone into irrigation agriculture, commercialization of agriculture, for example. You see that there is 13.1 billion. And then you go to Shire Valley Transformation Program, you have got 18.9 billion, which is reasonably good actually for the Shire Valley. There, you could say, yes, this is good. But if you look at 18.9 billion plus the commercialization of agriculture, which is 13 billion, if you add those two, they are coming to just under 33 billion Malawi kwacha, which is lower than what has gone to FISIP.
Okay.
My thinking would have been, if commercialization of agriculture and allocations that are going to Shire Valley program like those, which is going to be an irrigation program, should have been higher than on the FISIP. Then we come to health, and you say, okay, what has gone into health? What is making up that big chunk? The whole health is getting, as I said, a big figure, which is 172.8 billion. No, that's education. Health is 101, rather, 101 billion. But then you say, out of the 101 billion, where has the money gone? And then you discover that, okay, drugs, we are procuring about 25.9 billion. It's a reasonable chunk. It's almost over a quarter of what we need. And then on ambulances, we are allocating about 5.8 billion. But if you check, a lot of the money that has been allocated in our budget is still on what we call recurrent expenditure. And recurrent expenditure, we are talking about salaries of our staff that are working in the civil service, and then all the other things that go with either transportation in the ministries. You're talking about conferences and everything else. So if you are going to transform our health sector, for example, in a country like Malawi, maybe we need to start thinking about how do we invest more in preventive health services? Because it's expensive to treat people when they are already sick.
Yeah.
But it's cheaper when you treat them, or when you at least prevent the diseases from happening. So community health services, community care programs, programs that can make us remain healthy before we get sick, and you get back to food.
Yeah.
So when you get back to food, you discover that our investment in agriculture has predominantly remained in starch production. When we are talking about FISIP, the 35 billion I've talked about, plus the 10 billion of the maize purchase we are talking about, we are simply talking about procuring starch for our people. Go to people who tell us about health. They will tell us that for our bodies to be healthy, it's not just starch. Actually, they say reduce starch content intake.
So you think that's a lot of money for starch?
Yeah, we are spending too much on starch. I think as a country, we needed to appreciate the fact that what we call food in our country, which is predominantly, we're talking about Nzima. Yes, we need the energy, but it is not the most healthy part. Of course, there is allocation to growth of pigeon peas or beans and what have you. But the allocation which is going to protein production in the nation, allocation that is going to probably diversification of horticulture, is still very minimal compared to what we are investing in this starch.
So how should we approach that problem?
I think this,
in your view,
as a country, we need to have a national conversation on how much we still think Nzima should be our major driving factor. Because if you look at everything really in this nation, there is a lot of policy direction and talk and investment simply around the production of Nzima. It's our staple food, I understand. But the question is, how best can we get our people to grow other alternative crops that are high nutrient content, that have got high nutrient content, that are well balanced, that can actually sustain us even health-wise better than simply the consumption of starch.
You know,
So in the long run,
Yeah.
what I would simply suggest is some food diversification is going to be very key for this nation to progress.
you know that a lot is always budgeted in this country, but following the money has been a problem, and this is where corruption comes in.
Yeah.
And sometimes some votes, they are not accounted for.
Yes.
What would you advise parliamentarians as they very soon they'll go into vote by vote?
Yes. To be frank, the way the budget statements are presented, they are highly technical.
Okay.
And we need to appreciate that fact. This is a new parliament that has just, I think over 60-70% of the parliamentarians are new. And if possible, I don't know what parliament does, but what they did in the last sitting was to create clusters where the parliamentarians would meet in clusters and scrutinize and go through the budget. I would say it's also the onus is on professional bodies. You talk about ICAM, for example, the Institute of Accountants in this country. Talk about Economics Association. These are some of the professional bodies that must also assist in making sure that we digest the budget, then present some of the key issues in a summarized format, so that our parliamentarians can actually look at the issues and focus on where probably key issues or areas of concern must be given more attention. So I would say it's a responsibility of every Malawian, because this is our national budget, and this is what is going to drive investments. This is what is going to drive expenditure in the next 12 months. So we can offer some help to the parliamentarians. But now, getting straight to your question, what should parliamentarians do? They should also consult and really say, talk to people and say, okay, fine, we have a national budget here that has been presented. What do you think? But I would ask them to critically look at the finer details in the budget. If I would give you just a simple example.
Yes.
If you look at under allocations that have gone to, for example, Minister of Transport. Under the transport sector, for example, there is an allocation, a total allocation of 88.3 billion that is going to transport sector. And then when you read the budget statement, it has actually made some very attractive pronouncements of what they're going to do to transform the sector. And then you go into the details, then you look, okay, you read Chileka Runway has been allocated probably 2.5 billion. Rehabilitation of just the runway. Zuzu New Airport, 500 million. Now, if a runway costs 2.5 billion to rehabilitate, the finer detail should tell us that an allocation to a new airport in Mzuzu of 500 million, probably it's an under allocation. Of course, they've used the word initial budget, but it all means that in the initial 12 months, under that construction of that new airport, what they're only going to work with is about 500 million. So if you look at details like these, they help you to appreciate some of the areas that have made us to fail. Look at the ministry like Ministry of Industry, Trade and Tourism. This is a key ministry. We say private sector is the engine for our economic growth. But what do they have? 14.2 billion. They actually have just slightly more than what has been allocated to maize purchase, which is 10 billion. They have actually just slightly more than what has been allocated to the Malata subsidy, because Malata subsidy has got 10 billion. And a ministry which is industry, trade, and tourism. Now, tourism is quite key if this country is going to diversify. But they are going to work with about 14.2
We
billion.
have to take a short break.
Thank you.
I'll be
Right,
back
okay.
with you in a moment.
All right.
In case you're just joining us, this is Times Exclusive, airing on Times Network. I'm joined by economist Henry Kachaje. We are looking at the 2019-2020 presented budget in Parliament. We'll take a short break. We'll be back shortly.
I love brilliant green on my walls. I love signal red, sweet lime, electric blue. I just love golden yellow.
You get all that and more at Rainbow Paints. Imagine a water-based paint that is water-resistant. Imagine a paint that is absolutely washable to remove dirt. And it guarantees you 10,000 cleaning scrubs over its lifespan without losing its luster. There can only be one paint that does just that, and that paint is acrylic sheen. Get yours today at all leading hardware stores. Rainbow Paints. Peace of mind. Part of the deal.
You're watching Times Exclusive on Times Network. I'm joined by Henry Kachaje, Malawi's renowned economist. We are looking at the 2019-2020 budget. President Mutharika has promised 2 football teams in this country, Nyasa Big Bullets, the Wanderers. A promise of a stadium each. And he has said that he's going to use the taxpayers' money to construct those stadiums. Have you seen any allocation of the same in this budget?
Yeah, I've looked in the budget.
Yeah.
Indeed, there is an allocation of about 1.6 billion,
Okay.
which I'm told, according from from the statement the minister delivered, each team is going to have an allocation of about 800 million to start with, as they in this particular budget.
So it's indeed taxpayers'
so
money.
to answer you straight, yes, I've seen it in the statement.
Okay.
It's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it worth it?
That's a very good question. Is it worth it to invest in stadia for these 2 football teams? Let's look at the amounts. They are giving them 1.6 billion, and then we are also constructing an airport in Mzuzu, which has been given 500 million. So, which means the national airport has got a much lower allocation compared to what has been allocated to these 2 football teams.
Private entities.
Yes. So I think there's been a lot of debate around this question. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it something that should indeed take our taxpayers' money? I gave a comment on social media at some point that sometimes maybe in society you get to a point where in your family you are always struggling with your children. You can't find enough money to pay this, and sometimes a father just says, look, just today anano seti tikaji ice cream. The question is, should the father buy that ice cream when the school fees sanamalize kulipira? So I think rationally you'd say, you might want to say, no, maybe we shouldn't be spending our limited resources on investment of infrastructure like this. Probably, maybe if it was an investment that is going to simply remain public, and then you allow these football teams to have access to it so that they develop the sport, it makes sense. But if you want to use public resources and give them to investments in this area like football, my question probably would be, can it work if such money was allocated to them as a loan and then they've got a capacity to pay back? If that doesn't work, then we'll leave it to Parliament. I think Parliament has a role to scrutinize the budget and see whether such an expenditure within a limited budget, within limited resources, might be justifiable at this stage.
Where in a world would a government use taxpayers' money to construct stadiums for private companies?
Maybe let's get back to the question private. Bullets. Bullets and Wanderers, are they indeed public or private? What is your understanding?
I don't know.
Okay, maybe we should have asked Walter Nyamilando first before coming here. Because from a layman's point of view, I am made to believe that these are companies, these are football teams rather, that periodically get a sponsor. If we remember correctly, Bullets for some time had no sponsors in this country. Then came these guys who are Nyasa, who said, okay, now we are going to sponsor this team. At some point, I think a former president, Dr. Bakiri Muluzi, did sponsor Bullets. So I don't know when they sponsor it, whether when you are sponsoring it, it becomes your private entity, or it's an institution which is owned by the people, but then it gets somebody to sponsor it. So from that angle, the question would be, can a government decide to say, at this point, we know football is an important element, and as a government, we will sponsor it. So for me, I'm looking at it from that angle. Can a government say, we will sponsor football because we want to develop the sport, as any other private entity has sponsored it? If you look at Silver Strikers, Silver Strikers is sponsored by, I think at some point it was being sponsored by the Reserve Bank. Is Reserve Bank a private institution or a public institution? Why is Reserve Bank sponsoring Silver Strikers? So those are the questions that probably we might need to appreciate and understand. That said, I would like to simply say that if we were a rich nation with the capacity to sponsor even the development of sports, arts, and anything that is culturally enhancing and developing us as a nation, I would say a government can consider doing that. But the question always comes down to say, when can you do it? When you are hungry or when you have been well fed? When can you do it? Can you do it when you have people that are failing to access drugs, or you do it when at least you have bought enough ambulances? So I think that will remain a debate.
It will remain a debate, and it's still causing a lot of debate in the country. You know, energy is the backbone of any country that is on the move.
That's right.
How much are we putting in this budget into energy?
When I looked at the budget statement, the minister has allocated 40 billion to energy and mining. Again, I'm doing a comparative analysis. If energy has been one of our major bottlenecks in terms of unlocking the economic potential of our nation, is this an amount which is adequate to address some of the underlying issues? Because if you read the statement, the government has made commitment to invest in Egenco, our company that is generating energy for us, so that they can diversify from hydro energy to solar energy. They want them to diversify to wind energy and other sustainable sources of energy. A very good dream and a very good ambition. But is this 40 billion an allocation that is adequate? Yes, there are statements there in the budget that government is going to be pursuing public-private partnerships where they have an infrastructure project which they will ask private sector to invest together with them as it's a public need. But is this materializing fast enough to help us unlock the economic potential of the nation? My assessment is probably not. I feel like as a country, we need to be in the forefront to invest more in the energy sector. And for me, the 40 billion is not adequate. I feel like we will still remain with persistent power problems in this country for some time, because this amount can only facilitate a few probably studies that they have put, some feasibility assessments that they have, but not necessarily infrastructure development in the energy sector. We've been talking about Kamwamba project. I hope you have heard this story of Kamwamba coal plant. I haven't had a chance to go and see where that project is, whether there is any stone or any foundation that has been put, but it has been more than 10 years of talking about Kamwamba. So sometimes only relying on foreign direct investment into such infrastructure or the PPP arrangements might not necessarily work quicker enough for us. I would be happy if, as a government, they prioritized energy as a key sector. And then we'll also be talking about the mining. What is it that we are doing with the bigger resources that have been allocated?
Your thoughts on the tax that has been put on unbankable money?
Yes.
Mobile money transfer.
Mobile money transfers. If I would be blunt, honest, I would say this tax should be removed.
Should it be removed?
No, it should be removed. You know, the people that are doing mobile money transfers are the very poor of our country in many cases. You are in town, you want to send some money to your grandmother in the village. They need to buy some salt, they need to buy some sugar. The quickest way these days is to do the transfer through mobile money. And this platform has actually increased what we call access to the financial services by the unbanked. Because these are people who cannot walk into a bank and open an account and be able to service even the interests that are charged or the service charges on an account. But at least when it comes to transactions through mobile money, they are able to do a lot more transactions. They are business transactions or even just social services. Now, Brian, to tax someone for sending money to somebody to buy a coffin, I don't know whether this is a tax that should be should remain. If there was a way of lobbying Parliament, I would say no. I think let's remove that tax.
It's not worth it.
No,
but his understanding is that there is so much money moving outside banks, and that money is not taxed.
No, but you're talking about, this is not, you are not talking about revenue being generated, because the people that are getting that money transferred to them, you send that money to your grandmother in the village. She receives the money. She'll go buy sugar.
Yeah.
She'll go buy soap. She'll pay tax.
That's right.
Out of that money. So it's not like it's money that is simply going into pockets, which is not going to find its way again into a system where government can get its tax. No. Government is still getting its tax through VAT.
Yeah.
So it's not like when I get that money transferred to me, it's money that I'm spending on things that I'm not going to pay tax on. It's simply facilitating transactions.
What
I
impact?
may be wrong, but for me,
Yeah.
I would feel like let's not make mobile money transactions expensive.
What impact is this tax going to have on mobile money transfer?
It might discourage some people from doing these kind of transactions that you can actually even aggregate. When you are doing your economic analysis, you can at least know how much money is in circulation, how much money is moving from people at any given time, and the Reserve Bank is able to do it through the mobile money transfer. But if it becomes now expensive, then we will resort back to how we used to send money. You just have to wait until upite kumudzi, and when you go kumudzi ukapereke kondramayo then ukabwere, because if it becomes quite expensive, then it also it might limit the flow of money into the rural sectors, which the mobile money platforms have actually facilitated.
All is not bad in the budget.
No.
We have seen that government has taken a firm stand on encouraging local manufacturing. Yes. Cement coming outside the country is being taxed.
Yes.
Vegetables. We were even importing
onions
and the eggs and tomatoes and vegetables.
Yes, yes.
Do you think that is going to encourage the local manufacturer and the local farmer?
There's actually, that was one of the positive highlights in the budget. Yes, you need to put some incentive for local production, because if it becomes much cheaper to simply import a vegetable, then why do you have to waste your time, plant, tender your production and of vegetables? So I thought that is quite good, and it's likely going to make locally produced fresh vegetables and these goods quite affordable compared to those that are coming from outside. There is also probably something you talked about, the manufacturing sector, cement.
Yeah.
And then I've also seen in the budget that there is a positive move where government has actually reduced the qualification for you to access duty-free imports of construction equipment and materials for a hotel or a lodge of up to 20 rooms if you are a local Malawian. I think the previous standard was quite high. I think you needed to be constructing something which was, I think, above 50 rooms.
Okay.
Now, this is again a positive thing, which is going to encourage many small operators, people with reasonably less capital, to venture into construction of hospitality infrastructure. In this case, we are talking about hotels or lodges that you can construct duty-free on the materials if you are constructing something which is beyond 20 rooms. So for me, that is quite a positive thing that I've seen in the budget as well, among many.
Despite our challenges as we finish tonight, are you optimistic about this country and its resources and how we are going? This is lots of money.
Yes. I think optimism comes in the prudence of usage of our resources. It's not a secret that in this country there is lots of wastage, lots of pilferage, lots of stealing of public resources. Corruption remains very high in this nation. So as much as the budget is there, as much as the budget has actually promised many things, what still remains a concern for every patriotic Malawian is at the level at which corruption remains unchecked in many instances.
Yeah.
I think a concern also comes because many of the, if you look at the budget, for example, there is a mention by the minister that in the previous budget, revenues were lower than what they had been projected, and some area was performance of parastatals. Parastatals were not able to remit any much dividends as government had expected. So yes, we can be that optimism, but that optimism must come with the right kind of instruments. And for me, one of the key issues is issues of governance. Governance of our public institutions is quite key for us to deliver on a budget like this one.
Yeah.
The follow through of all expenditure as it is in the budget is quite important. There is a good commitment from government that has been put in this budget that public officers are going to be held personally accountable for over expenditures and any misuse of resources. And I think that is quite important, because if you don't hold people accountable for misuse of public resources, then there isn't any incentive to encourage others to become prudent. Because if I get away with misuse, my neighbor is going to get away with misuse. Another person is going to get away with misuse. And at the end of the day, we end up wasting. But maybe let me also just give this example. You can have a good budget like this. Let's say, like we had some time, government approves that we procure things like tractors. And then they come in the country, and then you don't use them for the intended purpose. Then they end up in the hands of well-able people who buy them at very low prices. Then you take that debt burden and give it to the whole nation. If you look at the debt repayments in our budgets are quite huge. We are paying over 200 billion annually, servicing just interest on debts. Now, if these were debts that had been taken for the kind of infrastructure that generated real economic growth, would have said, yes, it's worth it to be paying that debt. But if you are paying that debt on, for example, as I gave that example, on tractors that we are not even using as...
We are still paying for that?
We will be paying it for several years to come.
And these are the things that are not with Malawi.
So those are the issues that sometimes make people to become less optimistic, because we are not as prudent when it comes to execution.
Is there any specific area you wish we had concentrated on financially, apart from the areas that we have talked about?
Yes, youth empowerment. There is, of course, some section of youth empowerment that has been spoken about in the budget. But if you look realistically, the kind of youth empowerment that would need is not just a matter of giving them a chance to plant trees somewhere and then earn an income. It's good for the country if we are planting trees and caring them, thank God. But I think the kind of youth empowerment, especially for a country like ours, where we have a very growing youthful population, it's job creation. But when you look at the budget, when they analyze success stories of 2018, 2019, you can't quantify how many jobs have we created in the country. And even in the new budget, you can't quantify to say how many new jobs are we hoping to create other than the internship placements of 2,000 youth. What else are we doing? Because I'm quite concerned, and I really need to raise this concern here, that there is a contraction of private sector that is going on unchecked. If you look in the papers, many private sector firms are laying off people. So each time people have been laid off, those are jobs lost. And when you have more jobs lost, then you know you are not creating job opportunities for our growing youthful population. And for me, this is an area that I would wish government must give a specific attention to.
We wish we had more time, Mr. Henry Kachaje. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian,
for joining us tonight. Thank you very much indeed. Well, on that note, we conclude this week's edition of Times Exclusive. In this edition, I've been engaging with Mr. Henry Kachaje on the 2019-2020 national budget. My name is Brian Banda. From all of us here at Times headquarters in Blantyre, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.